Yes, this is Daniel Kiran from Vancouver, British Columbia. And I thought this evening I'd like to share some thoughts about the human condition and ways to help people and to care for their difficulties that are so common to the human race. It's, I think, well known that abuse and cruelty in an individual, whether it comes in a verbal form or physical form, it can take many forms of self-abuse or of cruelty and abuse towards others. And I think it's important to define terms. When you say abusive words, these are words that cut to the heart, that are designed to injure the ego or the self-worth, self-concept of the other person. And in some ways, the verbal abuse can be more impacting than physical, although physical is equally impacting, because physical abuse conveys all the meaning of verbal abuse. That is, devaluing the other person to the extent that you would physically attack them or hit them. And so it's designed to, the best word I can think of is to degrade the other person in some way, by physical means or by verbal means, to degrade them. So that causes pain to that person. And so that person may have a tendency then to transfer that abuse that they've either witnessed when they were growing up or experienced. They may then transfer that abuse into their next meaningful relationship. And I believe that abuse and cruelty is expressed not only towards another, but towards oneself as well, in various ways, be it drug abuse, a lifestyle that's self-destructive or damaging to that person's health, mental health as well as their physical health. And so abuse can go toward oneself, self-criticism, self-judgment, self-put-downs, anger towards oneself, hanging on to guilt too long. And that brings us to the next concept, and what I'd like to share with you this evening is that there's a process, I believe, of healing these behaviors and these patterns and the cycle of abuse. The first stage in the healing process is to recognize the pattern, to recognize the behavior that's unhealthy. So this is what I would call the first stage, which is confession, or recognizing. Saying, I know that I have a problem with anger, and it is a problem that has many ramifications, many effects, injurious effects often. So the first one is recognizing the unhealthy behavior. The second stage is remorse, or grieving the emotional aftermath or impact of the unhealthy behavior. Grieving that. If it's a matter of saying hurtful things, abusive, cruel things to another person, it involves expressing remorse that you're sorry for doing that. Deeply sorry. So, genuine remorse is this stage, or of grieving the abuse that maybe one experienced. And that carries over into grieving the effects of allowing that behavior to be repeated in subsequent relationships. So remorse for that. And then the third stage is forgiving of self and others. So this stage, when you're going through this as a reconciliation process between two people, first stage would be confession of how I've hurt you. Okay. Second stage would be expressing being sorrow for that behavior. And then the third is asking forgiveness, saying, do you forgive me? I know I don't deserve your forgiveness, but I need your forgiveness. I need your forgiveness, but I don't deserve it. Excuse me. So that's the next stage. Now, whether or not forgiveness is given, or the other person may be so unfinished in their anger, unresolved in their issues with you, that they're not able to offer forgiveness. But nonetheless, you extend it, and you continue to extend it for what you've confessed, the behavior, the unhealthy behavior, the abusive behavior, for example. And then you make a commitment to change, to not repeat the hurtful behavior. People need to go through this process maybe numerous times before actual change occurs. Acknowledging the behavior, expressing remorse, grieving the behavior and the elements of that, and then forgiving of self and seeking forgiveness from the other, and then making a commitment to change, maybe coming up with a new, more realistic pattern or course of action for change. Small steps are sometimes better and more likely to succeed than big steps in change. And then building until change becomes more complete. Then the fifth principle in this process is to go through the above stages: confession, remorse, forgiveness, and commitment, without blame, and without giving justification for one's behavior, without blaming the other people or person involved. I'm not saying that anger might not be part of the grieving process in stage 2, the remorse stage. Anger sometimes and often is a part of that. And then being able to move to sadness. So being able to go through the stages without blaming others, with the exception that I mentioned, and without excuse or giving false reasons, or without self-justification. In other words, a true process does not involve self-justification. So you take full responsibility for the behavior, and you fully take responsibility for your commitment to change. You seek forgiveness of the other. You forgive yourself. And then you move forward to change to a healthier way. Thank you. Hello, this is Daniel Kiran from British Columbia, Canada. And I'd like to share some thoughts about how to assist a person to begin to make changes in their life in terms of changing unhealthy patterns. Unhealthy patterns might involve extreme withdrawal or extreme aggressive behavior. And it might involve choosing unhealthy relationships or relating in an unhealthy way to people in meaningful relationships in particular. And usually the unhealthy behavior takes the form, generally speaking, of overly aggressive or overly passive behavior or combination. Both the overly aggressive and overly passive behaviors are, of course, distancing. In other words, they prevent people from getting close. And so they may be consciously or unconsciously used to push people away. The overly aggressive or overly passive personality or behavior set. So I'm suggesting that in order to help a person change that behavior, they need to, they can be approached with certain questions that facilitate their change process. For example, what is the feeling, or what are the feelings that you have around what's happening now, the current event? What kind of feelings? How did you react to the event, in the event? What emotions did you express? And so what you're looking for here are indications that the emotional reaction or behavior was an exaggeration from what would be considered healthy or functional effective behavior. So you help the person identify the behavior or the emotions, the fear, the anger, the guilt, the sadness, the emptiness, the low self-worth, or the despair. Help them identify those emotions and help them to confess or recognize that the behavior was exaggerated, did not fit the situation, was more than what was needed, and then you move them to the next stage, which is to recognize where the origin of that over experienced it. Because unhealthy behavior patterns, the exaggerated emotion or whatever the behavior might be, that's a distancing behavior, overly passive, overly aggressive behavior, was something that the person used to cope with an early life experience. So this is the repertoire they bring with them into the current situation. Whatever they used to survive in the early years, it's often what they will continue to use to survive in similar circumstances as they occur in their current life or adult life. So you're helping them to connect the current situation, event, reaction to the earliest. This is part of the confession process in the therapeutic process. Recognizing, owning it, recognizing where it comes from, recognizing that it's more than needed. Okay, so then you move them to the next stage, which is to discuss with them and to ask, in that early event that started the unhealthy pattern, you did that to protect yourself and to survive a difficult situation, a painful situation. And who do you wish had been there for you in that painful situation? Still using the historical event, the earliest event, but saying, who do you wish had been there for you, to stand up for you, to speak for you, to protect you, to care for you, to comfort you, to speak up for you in that earliest event or events? How would you describe the ideal parent? And what would you have wanted the ideal parent to have done for you in that earliest childhood traumatic event or events? So the individual will then say, and they will speak of the qualities of the ideal parent. And you can also add to those ideal qualities perhaps, but it's best if it comes from the other person themselves, because they know somewhere within the ideal parent needs to be like. And so now you ask another crucial question, which is, so now when you experience that pain, like the pain you had when you were a child, who needs to be there for you if nobody else will? If nobody else will be there for you, who does that leave? That leaves the person themselves. If I'm that person, I would say, I'm the only person who's there for me. And the implication of that realization is very important, which is that one now needs to do for oneself what you wished had been done for you by the ideal parent. One needs to do, you need to do, I need to do for myself, and you need to do for yourself what you wished the ideal parent would have done. You need to speak up for yourself. You need to care for yourself, comfort yourself, reassure yourself, forgive yourself. Forgive yourself. So that's the process I'd like to share with you. And it's not an easy process. No one said it would be easy. Life is not a bowl of cherries, as they say. And in order to succeed in changing, one needs to be determined. Once the individual recognizes what they need to do for themselves in painful situations, which is to take care of themselves and support themselves and validate themselves, take care of their issues, speak up for themselves, then they now have ways they can change. And that's extremely valuable to that person. to have an awareness, a vision of how they can change. So it might involve assertiveness training. It might involve allowing oneself to grieve around loss of parental caring, for example, or any type of loss, or pain or abuse. If one is a victim of abuse, it means standing up for oneself by taking care of oneself in that situation, removing oneself from that situation, for example. As you would remove the child that's being abused. You remove it from that situation and protect it. So that's what one needs to do for oneself